Okay, fine. So the last application layer example that we are going to see is called file transfer protocol or FTP. Okay. The file transfer FTP protocol, FTP service can be used as a command line application in most Unix based system and also Windows probably, or it can also be used by GUI type applications where basically it performs FTP in the background and it takes its options from the user. Okay, so we will now we'll now study this. This is a quite old service actually, this file transfer protocol or FTP. Again, it is built on a client server model. The user is the FTP client and there is a server. So suppose the example that we are going to show in this, the user wants to retrieve a file from a server. This is what he wants to do. Okay, this is one of the common use cases. The other use case is the user wants to upload a file to a server. That is also possible. Okay. So here in this case, the user wants to fetch some file from a server. Now, how to do it? Well, the client requests for the file or sends the file to the server and the server responds with the file data and or stores the file. This is understandable. One important thing to understand is this blue lines and the white, the arrows, the blue arrows and the white arrows, the black arrow. The blue arrows and the black arrow has been shown separately. As you can see, there are two blue arrows. These two blue arrows imply that commands are being distributed or commands are being exchanged or responses are being exchanged between the client and the server. And the black arrow is the actual file data that is coming from the server to the client. So these two are separated. And it is not that it has been shown by using separate arrows just like that, just to make things clear. It is actually separated also in FTP, as we will see very soon. FTP also works in two different modes, active and passive. We will come to that. The active mode is more common. Okay, so you concentrate on the active mode. The FTP server uses, let us first consider the active mode, then I will come to the passive mode, which is a more, more complicated this thing. FTP server itself, just one server, uses two different ports. Till now, we have seen other types of servers, for example, the HTTP server that actually keeps on listening to it listens to actually two different ports by default, 80 and 8080. But for initiating a HTTP connection with another server, you need to connect at port 80 or 8080. You do not need to connect to both. In this case, actually, you need to actually perform HTTP connections to two different ports. The FTP server for command or control, it uses port 21. Okay. So if you recall that there are ports numbers less than 1023 or less than 1024 are reserved for particular applications, whereas those ports above 1024 are called ephemeral ports or user process ports, user assigned ports, which can be used by any application, and there is no fixed rule that you have to use or fixed convention that the server process must use this port. That is not the case. For the data transfer, the server uses either port 20, which is most common, or a client assigned port. What is a client assigned port? We will come to it in the passive mode. Okay, just so for now, consider port 21 for command and port 20 for data for the server side. How does the connection work? Let us concentrate on the figure on the left, the active mode figure. Okay, passive mode, I will come later. Suppose the client wants to uh, get a file from the server. Okay. So first it initiates a HTTP connection. Initiates a TCP connection between say port 37843 and the command port 21. 37843. How was this chosen by the client? Well, this was randomly chosen. Okay. It has to be less than 65,000 something, and it has to be more than 10. So by this rule, 37843 was randomly chosen, and it's connected to this server at port 21. So you have to, at the FTP prompt, you have to, at the command prompt, if you are using a Linux or Unix command prompt, you have to type FTP, then the server name or IP address. Okay. Then there is an authentication phase. This authentication typically requires you to give a login and a password, username and a password. So you give the username and password. Notice that every time these arrows are bidirectional. Don't get confused by this. Okay. These bidirectional arrows basically mean that two-way data transfer is going on. One is the data transfer, in a sense, in this case, command and response transfer is going on, and each command and response transfer is being acknowledged from the other side. This is how transport layer TCP works. Okay, TCP, as you will study very soon, it works by acknowledging every successfully received message back to the sender of the message. This is a version of TCP that makes it very complicated to implement, complicated to understand also initially for students when you study it for the first time, the details, but it is necessary to make it reliable. We remember that the TCP, this transport layer, TCP has made a promise to the applications on top of it, for example, file transfer or this SMTP or HTTP, that it will perform reliable data delivery and ordered packet delivery. This is guaranteed. This is the layer above it. However, the layer below it, the network layer, does not guarantee these things. So these have to be implemented by some mechanism in TCP itself. And that is why TCP is quite difficult and cumbersome to implement and a little bit difficult to understand also initially, but this is very, very important. Okay. So every response is immediately acknowledged actually that yes, successfully received. So even if there is a response to a command, incoming command from the client to the server, that would also be in turn again acknowledged by the client that yes, I have received it. It works in this way. Okay. Then you enter an username, or you do not need and a password. Okay, so typically there are messages. Login information required. Then it will give enter username. You give the username, then it will, the server would reply back saying password required for user this. Then you give the password. If it is successful, then it will say login successful or something. Okay. Now, when this login successful happens, at the background, the user do not need to mention this, but the client sends to the server the port at which the TCP connection is being used. I mean, this connection is being used. this port command would probably execute in the background. You, the user, do not need to execute it separately. So what I am talking of is the interaction of the user with the FTP application. It presents a command line interface where you can type commands. But in the background, these commands in turn are translated and appended with additional commands, and the transactions take place. So now the server initiates a new TCP connection, okay, at the port mentioned by the client, which is port 37843. Sorry, port 38069, because this is a new TCP connection. Okay, this is the very important thing to understand. The port that will be used by the client side for the command interface and the port that will be used on the client side for the data interface are different. So you might have asked, why does the port need to tell the server again about its data port? It is evident because already there is an existing port 37843. Server already knows about it because it has accepted a TCP incoming TCP connection from the client. Why can't it? Why does it again need to be told about port 38069? Well, because another port using a port command, because it is going to be a different port, which is 38069. So now the client tells the server that, okay, now you initiate a TCP connection at port 38069. And this is something peculiar with FTP, okay? See, in other applications, usually the TCP connection initialization is done by the clients because the client wants a service. It is his he needs to get some work done by the server, so he proactively initiates the connection. In this case, yes, the client initiated the connection with the server, no doubt. But then the client tells the server, now you please initiate a connection at my port, an incoming connection at my port. Which port? Port 38069. And the server initiates a TCP connection at that port. This string, this server assigns new port, don't get confused with this. Server does not assign anything. By the word, by this term server assigns new port, it means that the server initiates a connection at port 38069. Okay. And when the connection is established properly, the server starts the data transmission based on whatever information has been given by the client. So those are probably not shown. There will be additional commands given. For example, the commands you give, typical commands you give to get copy a file from the server to the client at the interface is get, get file name. If you want to get multiple files using Unix meta characters like star, suppose you want to get all the text files from the home folder. So, okay, so you can write mget. When you log in, you will be at the home folder anyways, probably. You can put mget start.txt. You can also give commands to list the folders like ls type of commands. Everything is supported. Okay, most of these are supported, and you will get the replies back from the server. Okay, so you can do mget start.txt. Mget is for multiple get. Okay, so that gets multiple files back, etc. Finally, you can type exit or quit or something, and that command actually in the background then releases the connection. So data transmission can be both ways actually between the client and the server, and finally you can quit the this thing. Notice that the server, during data transmission, server used port 20. Okay. And since all connections are bidirectional, so if required, the client can also transfer data back to the server using this. The command to put data from a client to a server is called, I just said put, and the command is called put actually. That copies some certain files from the client to the server. Okay. Fine. then you try to quit, and then it is. Any questions about this? Please ask me questions. Okay. Any questions?
Sir, can you explain once again why two ports are required here at the client side?
Oh no, I have not yet explained. I'll come to that. Just give me some time. I'll come to that.
Sir, where is the arrow that shows that the client is requesting permission from the server?
What is the what?
Sir, where is the arrow which represents that the client is requesting information
This
from server?
arrow, this arrow from this arrow on the top, AUTH, this command, authentication command, this arrow on the right hand side, this is the thing that says that it is requesting connection to the server. And this arrow back from the server to the client is the response to that. These two arrows have been combined into one bidirectional arrow.
Thank you.
Do you get it?
Yes, sir.
Sir, the last arrow, in the bottom.
Yeah.
Is that for data transmission?
Quit arrow.
No. Yeah. Big
Yeah,
arrow.
or this one, the bigger arrow.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, this shows that data transmission from both the directions, if required, are possible after the connection has been set up. So the server assigns new port means server initiates a new data transmission, data connection, TCP connection at port 38069, and then server can transfer data from this side to that side. I mean, data can be transferred, and also from client side to server side also data can be transferred.
So is it showing both direction, right?
Yes, both directions.
And so once port 21 and port 38069 are sorry, port 20 and port 38069 are like they are talking, then how quit is happening between port 21 and
because the quit
37?
command would quit is a command. The command always uses the port 21 and its corresponding port on the client side, which in this case is 37843. So this quit command would close the TCP connection explicitly between ports 21 and 37843, and you will also close the TCP connection between port 20 and 38069. If the TCP connection between port 20 and 38069 is not closed, I think it closes actually, but even if not closed, after some time, typically the way TCP behaves, if there is no further data transfer in a connection which is idle for some time, it automatically closes the connection after some time which is configured in the system. So both these connections between 37843 and 21 and 38069 and 20 will be released after the quit command.
So I have a question, like this may be related to this, but as general, like when we download something and upload something, the upload is approx 7 to 8 times slower. Why is it so? If there is a two-way connection and all.
Which one? When the
upload speed is 7 to 8 times slower than download speed. Why is it so?
upload speed is usually always slower than download speed. Your internet service provider makes it asymmetric. Okay, very good question. It is not really related to the FTP topic, but it's a general question. Yeah, I mean, this is the problem. We did not cover this data communication details actually initially. But yeah, okay, I'll try to explain. So internet service providers have their business based on a model where they themselves pay money to lease certain bandwidth from other super service providers or from the government agency or something. Okay. Now, they gave a bandwidth. Suppose one internet service provider has got a bandwidth of, say, in a particular area, say it has got a 100 Gbps bandwidth. Okay, so in total, upload, download, bidirectional data transfer combined among all the users that it's using its network, maximum available bandwidth is 100 Gbps. Now this is has to be distributed among the users. Okay, suppose there are 1000 users. Now you 100 Gbps divided by 1000 users, something like 100 Mbps, it gives to 1000 users each. And say this is your total available bandwidth, 100 Mbps. This is your maximum data transfer speed total, upload, download combined. Now, when it does it, it makes an asymmetric distribution of what is the maximum download speed and what is the maximum upload speed among the users. It knows the psychology of the users. Most users, most of the time, are downloading data to their agent, which is either the personal computer or mobile device or whatever, and processing that information. Nowadays, it is primarily, I believe, multimedia information like videos probably constitute 80 to 90% of the traffic of the internet. So most of the times you will be watching videos or watching something, watching live sports, watching a movie. Okay. Watching a discussion, watching online news, watching anything random, any video on YouTube, etc. So most of the time you will perform data downloading operation as such. I mean, video streaming is kind of downloading because your browser buffers this video and then plays it using some video player plugin that it supports or whatever. I mean, browser has an inherent ability to modern browsers to play these videos, open PDF files, all these magical things are there. So I mean, it has this ability, so it does for you. And you can watch the video. But it does a lot of buffering of the information very fast. Because if the video resolution is quite high, then a lot of data is actually being buffered locally. Now, what is the percentage of time you will be uploading data? That you have to think, you have to ask the question yourself. Have you thought how much time do you contribute videos to YouTube versus how many times you as a consumer consume the videos that are available? Okay, minuscule of percentage of time for most of us, other than those who regularly upload videos, maintains a very active channel. But even they might upload a 1 hour video, but in a day they might be themselves watching 3 hours of YouTube. Okay. So this internet service provider argues that the uplink, this is not called upload and download rates. These are called uplink and downlink rates. The downlink rate is very important for the user. If the downlink rate is bad, his quality of connection will be very bad. Okay, his buffering of videos, etc. will be very, very slow, and he will give me gali saying that you are not providing me proper service. But my calculation shows that I cannot give him more than 100 Mbps. So I will set 70-30 or 80-20 kind of a rate, saying that, well, downloading is 80. You are allowed to download at 80% of the available bandwidth or 90% of the available bandwidth, and you can only upload at 10% of the available, because these two can simultaneously happen. Okay, it is possible. So in the worst case, You will be doing both at the same time. Now, there is also another factor. Because uploading is, why is this not a problem? Uploading is such a rare event that very lot of consumers, his customers, this 1000 customers, lot of them simultaneously uploading at the same time is an even more rare event, assuming all these events are independent of each other. Uploading is an event which is kind of independent of each other from each agent. It does not depend. So basically, if you think probabilistically, if the possibility or the probability of uploading is 0.01 at any point of time. Okay, so if 10 people uploading at the same time is 0.01 raised to the power 10. So it's like very, very small. So it doesn't create a problem. On the other hand, because downloading is a very common phenomenon, many users will download their or watch videos might be at the same time. Especially at particular times of the day, this might happen. If there is some popular sports playing on or something being played, this can happen. Okay, so all will watch the same sports at the same time, and all these things might happen. If there is a popular web series that has come new, there is a chance for the next 7 days people will watch this web series like crazy. So these are highly correlated events. Okay, these are not independent. So they want to make sure that a lot of bandwidth is given to each individual user for downlink, so that even if all of them are active at the same time, still the experience of each user in the network will still be okay. This is an important point. Actually, one student at the beginning of the course sent me a email asking this, that like mobile phone usage. I don't remember the exact question, but it was something like this, that see, what about mobile phone usage? Okay, the amount of bandwidth that each mobile company has, just forget about the data. Okay, data is relatively new phenomenon. Just consider the voice-based mobile system, the old mobile system. The amount of bandwidth they have is actually much less than what is possible to be afforded if all the people were talking in the network. But that's a very, very, very highly improbable event. Okay, so it never occurs. So this network survive. At least it can give us some service. But then bandwidth allocation does not happen for 10 years. For the 10 years, one company has the same bandwidth, whereas its customer base has increased 10 times or 20 times. And each of these customers have got smartphone who want to access data all the time. So the pressure on the network bandwidth is tremendous until you buy new bandwidth by paying money to the government and add to your existing bandwidth, or you change the technology completely where faster data transfer is simply just because of the technology, faster data transfer is possible. This problem has no solution, and day by day the quality of service keeps on decreasing as the pressure on the network increases. In all data, I mean in all internet type connectivities, downlink speed is faster than uplink speed. Okay, so this is actually a complicated phenomenon. I mean, if you read I don't know the newer versions of the Tannenbaum book, but the older versions of the Tannenbaum book had discussed these things in detail. This difference between downlink speed and uplink speed. That's why when you try to uplink something, upload something, your uplink speed is quite low, maybe 1/5 or 1/10 of your allowed downlink speed. Okay. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Sir, Before suppose I give one get request before the file is downloaded. If I initiate another put request, will it
It
make
will be
another
buffered.
connection?
Yeah,
Or?
no, it will not create another. No. This is a session. Before quit is happening, this is a session. What you said just now was what used to happen in HTTP. Every command was a new connection. That does not happen here. Here there is a session. Once you authenticate and log in, that session remains active. You can do multiple commands, get multiple files, put multiple files, etc. Okay. Using the same data channel and the same command channel that has been set up, those you can put to multiple things. Now the fundamental question, why are there two channels? Okay. Why are there two channels? Well, if you consider the server, okay, it has to keep listening to the port for incoming commands, okay, and to process them. Now, how often will it keep listening to these ports for incoming commands? Because if it is using the same shared channel, then after the data transfer has finished, okay, it does not want to keep resources probably always listening to that same command. And if it keeps on listening to the command channel once every 10 seconds to see if new commands have, or say once every 0.1 second to check if new commands have come, new commands will be typed in by the human user at the other end, who is very, very slow, who when the large file was getting downloaded or uploaded from the server has probably left for a cup of tea and will come back after half an hour. In the meantime, within 10 minutes, the file transfer is complete. For the remaining 20 minutes, this guy is kind of doing a busy waiting. Busy waiting is something which you will study in your operating systems. You repeatedly try to check whether new command has come, but nothing is coming. Okay, this effort of trying to look for a new command when nothing is coming is called busy waiting. Okay. In the meantime, I mean, your data transfer is finished. So basically you are sitting idle and busy waiting. You are busy, but you don't know when something will happen. Okay. Now you can always do a multiplexing between command and data, saying that, well, I will first do a command, then data, then again command, then data, then again command, then data. But this busy waiting problem might still be there because the slot in which you are expecting the command or control information, you might not find anything. And another thing is that if the command channel is also used for data transfer, okay, and if the data it is often used for very large file transfer, like extremely large file transfers, like say 100 GB file or something. Okay. Now, if the command channel is also used for data transfer, then the command channel gets blocked until that complete file has kind of been processed. And also, if there are other clients, they might experience slight delay or lot of delay because one client is hogging up this entire connection. Okay, because there is only one channel, right? Only one channel is there. Everything is at some port XX, and this port XX is handling all the connections, and it is being burdened by so much traffic from one channel that the other command sent by other clients cannot come in. Okay, of course there will be probably other threads or other child processes to handle this this requests, but still, if you are sending too much data traffic to the same port, then the command traffic might get affected for the other clients. So the other clients, for no fault of their own, might face delays. But if you can differentiate between the data channel and the command channel, then the process of sending and receiving control information while the data transfer is taking place can still go on in parallel, kind of. Okay, because the two processes, server processes, are one for data connection and one for control connection. Control information are hearing at different ports. So they can continue to send and receive control information while data transfer is going on between another client and the other port. Now the complicated part of FTP. FTP supports something called a passive mode. This is very, very peculiar. Okay, so please pay attention. What we had studied is the active mode, which is shown on the left figure, same figure. At some point in the active mode FTP, the port command is issued by which the client informs the server that data connection has to be initiated by the server at some port. In the diagram, that port is 38069, and the server initiates the data incoming, outgoing connection from TCP and incoming from the client side. TCP connection at port 38069 from port 20. And so you have this unidirectional arrow which says server assigns new port, means server initiates a TCP connection at port 38069. So this port command actually gave the server this information. The 38069 is the port at which the client expects the data connection. Now this is a problem when the client is behind a firewall, and that is a very, very common situation. The client might be a personal computer or a workstation in a LAN, in a university or any company. Okay. Which is behind a firewall, and such a firewall very commonly, because of security purpose, does not allow any incoming TCP connection from outside. Okay, from outside a third party which is seeming to be a FTP server, but because FTP can directly change the file structure of your folders, it is quite dangerous to give it access. Actually, FTP commands can do a lot of damage to your files if they are from bad people. Okay. So the firewall might, and there are other applications also there, which if you allow an incoming connection, then and the connection is set up, then the other party from the other side can issue commands and completely corrupt your file on your machine. So the firewall says, okay, any incoming connection request will be blocked. What to do then? Because the way FTP in active mode behaves, the server initiates the incoming connection to the client at the port that the client mentions. To solve this problem when the client is behind a firewall, FTP supports the passive mode where after the authentication has passed, the username and password has been correctly given and acknowledged by the server, and the authentication passes, correct password has been given. The client issues a passive command, PASV, to tell the server, look, I want to work in the passive mode. And what is the passive mode? An arrow has not been shown here, but what basically happens is that at that point in the passive command, when the server, arrow has been shown, but the details have not been shown. When the passive command happens, and if the server willingly accepts the passive mode of working for the client, the server might not accept it. Okay. But if it does accept the passive mode of access, then it replies back to the client saying that I will support your passive mode of operation and you now initiate a connection to a particular port number that I will tell you from your whatever port number to initiate the data connection. So in this case, the server tells the client, you can connect at port number 50621 or 821, whatever, 821. Okay. And then the client assigns new port means client does not assign. Client initiates a TCP connection at that port from its data port, which is again randomly chosen to be 55919 by the client. Okay. So the client now initiates the connection at that port, outgoing connection to the server. This time the firewall does not perform, firewall does not object, saying that, okay, yeah, it's okay. You can go out. No problem. So this is usually the case. This is comparable to probably say situation in halls. You have stayed in halls in IIT campus, or those who have spent time in hostels before. So typically the more enforcement is when somebody is trying to come in. At that time, the security will be very active and check whether the correct person is coming in, whether he is authorized to come in. In the department in the evenings, in every department in IIT Kharagpur, in the evenings, there is a security guard at the door. Security guard, when somebody is trying to come in, would make that person sign a security register and the time of coming in, etc. But usually the person is also supposed to sign when he or she is going out, but they usually never enforce that because that is not the primary concern. You are going out means you are leaving that facility. You do whatever you want. You go out and do whatever you want. But when you are coming in, then it's a more sensitive issue. It is kind of similar. The firewall this time usually will not object to an outgoing TCP connection. Although the threats might still be there, but most firewalls, they would probably not object to this. And then the data transmission might start from the server, between the server and client. Okay, so this is the passive mode. Any questions about this?
So, sir, if the firewall in the server side will have to allow every port in case passive connections are there.
Wait, I have some issue with the. Yes, could you please repeat your question? I couldn't hear it.
Sir, so in the server side, the firewall in the server side would have to allow every port out incoming connections from every port, right?
Yeah. Very good question. I was actually going to ask this question to you, that this entire FTP application is problematic because we are concerned about the client side security. What about the server side security? You are allowing anybody to just come in and log in to you. If they give the credentials, even anonymous FTP is allowed. Anonymous FTP is a situation where you don't even need to, you just type anonymous as the username. And when you type anonymous as the username, no password is required. Immediately you are allowed login. So that is horrible. Okay. What about the security of the server? Okay, so it is allowing incoming connection from any port, from any client if it is set up to be an anonymous FTP server, which means the party and an arbitrary party has access to the entire file system of the computer without any giving any input credential. Okay, this sounds unbelievable, but this anonymous FTP is actually quite common. These are in situations where a server has been set up with only some basic files and probably not having access to any other file system in the network, and some basic files are given. Basic means some files which people will retrieve from that machine, but that machine would in turn not be connected to any other file system in the network, so that beyond that local computer there is nothing, and that local computer also only contains some basic files which can be retrieved by the user, and but that's it, not of much use. Okay, so there is no security threat. However, FTP as such is, especially the unencrypted version of FTP which we described here, is not a particularly secure application. Okay. So most LAN system administrators would ban FTP application completely on all computers in the network. For example, the FTP is completely banned on all computers in the IIT Kharagpur Computer Science Department network. You cannot do FTP anywhere. It is this service, entire service is banned. That can be configured that way. The network can configure it. Neither can you set up a server so that people from outside will connect, nor can you go outside and fetch. Here it is quite strict, means you can, FTP as a client also you cannot perform FTP. I think it is something like this. I'm not sure, but if I remember correctly, it was, or maybe as a client you can still perform anonymous FTP or web page type FTPs are also there. So there is FTPs have been configured to behave like a web page kind of thing. That also I've seen. So the browser essentially executes FTP to get a file. Okay. But many would allow SFTP, the secured version of FTP, which works by and in an encrypted fashion actually. So that application is much more secure and that is allowed. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir.
Sir, in the whole FTP process, where are the TCP connection occurring? Like
at the beginning and at the end, when that AUTH command is happening, at the background it is basically performing an initialization TCP connection. And at the end, when quit command is typed at the background, it is performing a TCP connection release. And at every stage, all the commands you type or all the data transfer that happens between the client and the server at the background is happening with the help of TCP segments. Okay, which you don't need to bother about because your operating system takes care of creating these TCP segments and sending it out. What you only need to bother about is to call the TCP services provided by your operating system. And then TCP would provide all these services which are listed here. Okay. Is that clear? Because this question tells me that I think for you, many of you, it is still not clear where is TCP playing, I mean, transport layer service playing a role. We have not yet come to it. How the transport layer services work in detail, but at least you should understand how they help the application layer services. FTP is an application layer service. It interfaces with the transport layer service. People who have written the FTP application are aware of the transport layer services and the APIs they provide. These APIs, for those of you who are in the computer networks lab, in February, you will be given assignments to develop small applications which will use these APIs directly. So you will learn about them. This is called the socket programming interface, or Berkeley socket programming interface, because it was developed at UC Berkeley in the 70s probably. So the TCP, this transport layer would provide its services in terms of certain API calls, function calls, C function calls that we are going to study. There are also Python libraries, Java, any Java, Python, all C#, whatever. I mean, any modern programming language would have similar library of function calls corresponding to this transport layer services, which you can directly use. The Kuros and Ross book, the newer versions, give examples of network programming in Python. Okay, and they bash network programming in C, saying that it is too complicated, it is bad, it is that. But we still continue in C because in the operating system, actually those are implemented using C. And if you use the C function calls directly, you get very close control and a deeper insight of what actually happens. The Python function calls would hide most of the details of what exactly is happening. Okay, so why would this FTP application need help of TCP? Because the FTP application, so these are the common there are the commands like say user password. These are FTP commands, but TCP there is no command called user password port. Okay, so it gives a command, but then it translates it to TCP function calls to the transport layer saying that please connect to server with IP address this at port number 21, where my originating port is 37843. And it can do a function call and then it will try to connect to the server using that. Okay, the server one process is continuously running at port number 21, listening to incoming requests. When it receives an incoming request from the TCP process on the other side, if it thinks it will be able to accept the request, it accepts the request and spawns another child process. Okay. To handle the connection between the client and the server, whereas the original parent process keeps on listening at port number 21. In modern implementations, instead of spawning a new child process, the process spawns a thread. The advantage with threads is that the threads are lightweight processes which do not have that much of resource footprint as the complete process. A child process creation makes a duplicate copy of all the resources held by the parent. I think those of you who are taking the operating system course side by side, by now you have studied these things. And it is quite cumbersome because all the parent processes resources you might not need actually in the child later on. So it is better you create a lightweight process like a thread, and that thread will handle the new connection, whereas the original process will keep on listening to the port. Okay. By the way, I think I'm not sure, but I think another example of this this thing between processes and threads is the browser tab concept. Earlier means long back. Okay, it's like say 20 years back, maybe. The versions of browsers that existed at that time, which were only probably Netscape and Internet Explorer, and maybe Firefox was coming up and becoming popular. This concept of tabs, actually, when you created a tab in a window, browser window, and you initiated another connection in the new tab, that used to be a separate process. But at some point, I think Firefox first did it. They changed the mechanism and they made it a thread-based thing. Okay, so after the initial process starts, every new tab is a thread, not an independent process under that main original process. So anyways, it's not very relevant to our course, but I'm saying that where is TCP coming in the picture? TCP is coming in the picture by providing all these services in the background, which we are just taking for granted, that yes, there will be an authentication command, there will be a user command, and some response string would come back. There were other examples also, like in the last class, there was this SMTP session. This is a direct SMTP session between a SMTP client and a server. The lines written using C are the commands typed by the client, and the lines starting with S are the responses received from the server. So the client types hello abcd.com. The server replies back 250 cs.washington.edu says hello to e.uae.edu.au. Why? Because cs.washington.edu is actually the SMTP server and e.uwa.edu.au is the SMTP client. Okay. Then mail from received to, all these commands are typed by the client and the corresponding responses. These numbers probably mean something. What exactly does this number 250, 354, etc. mean? Probably you have to read the manuals to figure it out. But these are actual commands and actual session that is happening between two directly. So your applications, nice UI based applications in the back are doing this, running this type of sessions in the background. And probably it is getting logged somewhere. I don't know. Probably it is getting logged somewhere. We don't need to bother about. Usually we don't bother about these things. But this is not the end of the story. These commands do not mean anything to TCP. TCP does not understand any command called hello, mail from, receive to, etc. This is not then the command called data. These are not commands that TCP understands. So at the background again, SMTP has to do something, set up TCP connections with the meaningful parts of these commands, the important parts, for example, server names, etc. Do the necessary API function calls and perform the TCP connections. Once it performs the TCP connection, that's it. The application layer does not need to go beyond the first layer that it sees, which is TCP, the transport layer. The good thing is that the application layer, this email application layer, does not need to go below TCP. How will TCP manage this? That is TCP's concern. It only needs to pass on that information and interface with this transport layer properly using proper function calls or APIs. That's it. Those function calls are hidden from you. That is the entire idea of application layers services. The user does not need to bother about this low level TCP function calls. The user can type in commands which are easier to remember, like hello, mail from, receive to, data, and then type the content, then type quit. Quit is the final command typed by the client, and then the session completes. closing connection. Who is closing connection? SMTP is closing connection, fine, but then at the background, TCP is also closing. TCP is actually closing the connection. So that part is hidden from the user. It will pass on proper parameters to the proper transport layer APIs, which will close the existing TCP connection. That the user does not need to bother about. Otherwise, you needed to write, you can write, if you are that enthusiastic, you can write the entire thing in TCP. In fact, in the lab, I don't know whether it will happen this year, but other times we give assignments like implement a chat server using the transport layer function calls. Maybe the chat, chat client basically. So there will be two terminals chat windows that will come up, or it can be the terminal based chat also. No need to develop a GUI. You open a Linux terminal on this machine. Your friend also opens a Linux terminal on that machine. You initiate a chat session with your friend. You first try to log into your friend's computer with the friend's username, etc., or ping him in some way. Your friend accepts that chat request. Then the chat starts. You type in some text that reflects on his machine. He types the response that is reflecting on your machine, and this way the chat continues. Then you type a command or say quit or something, or bye bye or something, and then the session closes. This can be implemented using this direct TCP programming also. That's what students do. Here also these have been implemented in the background using that type of coding. But you as a user, you can just survive by typing these high level commands. Does it answer at least part of the question? Because we will be moving on to transport layer and TCP very soon. So that will also probably help you to make it clear what is meant by this connection establishment, connection release at the end, and in between all this data transfer. What do I mean by acknowledgement of every command and every data? What is acknowledgement? Okay, how do these acknowledgements work? Are these acknowledgements independent messages, or are these acknowledgements messages which are superimposed on other useful messages which also carries other information? Okay, so we will come to TCP. So one thing I'd like to tell you is that so if you, okay, let me go back to this thing. If you see from the server, certain response message was coming. Okay. Try to understand the complication of how complicated the situation is. The first command sent from the SMTP client to the server is hello-abcd.com. This will be translated into one or more TCP segments and sent to the server. When the server TCP process gets this TCP segment having this string, as per the rules of TCP, it has got nothing to do with SMTP. As per the rules of TCP, it must reply back to the TCP process running on this client side that yes, I have received your message faithfully. That has got nothing to do with SMTP. Now, what has got to do with SMTP is that if you receive a hello command, the server must reply back to the client in this format, that this, oh, okay. So the server service is e.uae.a2.au. This and the client name should be here, says hello to this. This is the rule of SMTP. This is how SMTP works. So now at the application layer, the server must reply back to the client with this cs.washington.edu says hello to ee.uaa.edu.au, this string. In the transport layer, it should reply back saying that I have released the segment that you sent me properly. Just for simplicity, just consider one segment, that this message hello@abcd.com can be held in one TCP segment, which is probably true because this is not a very long string. TCP segments have length limitations, which we discussed earlier. They cannot be arbitrarily large to that you will be sending. In one segment, you will send a very long string. That is not possible. So one segment carries this message to the server. At a TCP level, transport level, the server must acknowledge that segment using transport level mechanisms. However, it also has a task of acknowledging this hello command using this type of a string. So now it has two acknowledgements. Typically what happens is TCP as that instead of sending the first TCP acknowledgement and then forming another TCP segment corresponding to this application layer acknowledgement and again sending it, it piggybacks the acknowledgement of the first one on the TCP segment that will be formed because of this string message. 250 cs.washington.edu says hello to e.uae.edu.au. This also probably is small enough to be held in one TCP segment. So one TCP segment anyway has to be sent back to the client for this message 250 cs.washington, etc. On that, it will piggyback another message, piggyback some information saying yes, this is the message fine, but I received your previous message properly. So it is said that the acknowledgement is piggybacked on the next message that is sent back from the other side. The situation is something like this. Say in the days earlier to telephones or emails or mobile phones. Okay. The only way to communicate was through letters. There were situations where letters were urgent, letters were confidential, especially in government kind of situations or especially also in army type of situations. And it might happen that the person who carries the letter, the courier, to the receiver, requests the receiver that tells the receiver that I have an instruction to immediately that you should immediately read the letter that I have given you, write a response to this letter, and I will carry it back to the sender immediately. Because this is very urgent. I have been told that this is very urgent. So I have been given the task of delivering the letter to you and also to get the reply from you immediately and back. When say the receiver says, OK, fine, I'll do it. He reads the letter. He hands it to that courier who takes it back to the party. But in the letter, he adds another line saying, this is the response to your letter is fine, but he adds other line saying that I also received your previous letter properly, which was sent probably 1 week back. I acknowledge that I had received your previous letter 1 week back. So it is piggybacking the acknowledgement on the response to another letter. What is this saving? Well, this is saving him the trouble of sending back the separate acknowledgement for the first letter, because then you would have to send another acknowledgement. Now there can be situation where the server, depending on the application of course, where the server does not have a meaningful string like this 250 cs.washington.edu says hello to this type of a string to send back to the client. That can happen. In that case, it will only send back the acknowledgement, TCP acknowledgement, transport layer acknowledgement of the segment that was received corresponding to helloabcd.com. Okay, so this is not the complete picture. Internally, more complicated at the background, at the transport level, complicated things are happening. That is enabling this type of communication. We are watching this transaction of commands and responses from a command prompt and thinking that this is all. This hello command, mail from command, receive to command, data command, these are the things that is doing the magic. No, they are just the initialization of the processes of the communication. These are high level commands giving some information, but at the background, these are being translated to transport level communications, and those are being communicated with the server, and then from server to client also the same thing. Is it clear, students? I mean, it won't be completely clear, but at least some clarity should be there, because very soon we will now move to the transport layer protocol. So this is some FTP sample command and response. The commands are ASCII text over the control channel, and the sample return codes are status code and phrase. User pass. There's the status codes are there. 331. Username okay. Password required. Data connection already open. Transfer starting. List is kind of similar to LS. Pass. Return. STOR stored. Stored is actually retrieve. I think get and put also works. Okay. Now we'll go to the transport layer. In this transport layer, again, don't get confused. There is a connection between transport layer entities, which is a logical end-to-end connection. Okay. This connection is a logical connection which actually does not represent magical transport of transport layer segments between these two at these two transport layers through the blue arrow. This blue arrow, now earlier, see the application layer communication, we thought everything the application layer is doing using commands. That is not true. It is taking help of the transport layer. Now the transport layer would create a impression that it is doing all the magic by performing direct transport layer data segment transfer between the two transport layer entities and the two sites. That is also not true, because the transport layer in turn takes help of the network layer. The network layer in turn takes help of the data link layer, and the data link layer in turn takes help of the physical resources or the physical layer at the bottom, the electrical wires or wireless links or whatever. Okay, or fiber optic cables, whatever you can think of. So every aspect of networking is to make life for the people working at that level of networks easy. Application developers only need to know about the interface to the transport layer. Okay. Transport layer developers need to know about the protocols and accordingly implement the proper library functions and make them available to the application layer developers without bothering about how the network layer behaves. It just needs to pass on the information to the network layer. The network layer takes care of routing all the packets directly over several routers to the final destination with the help of IP addresses through a process called routing. And the data link layer also has its own functionality, etc. Okay, this diagram is a very important conceptual diagram. Okay. I mean, I cannot overemphasize how important this is. this you should just look at and try to assimilate in your head that what we are going to study, what we have already studied and what we are going to study in near future. In near future, we are going to study this blue arrow, the logical end-to-end transport mechanism. Okay. Both the transport layer and the network layer are mind-bogglingly, more or less, I mean, see, I don't want to make things which are inherently complicated sound very easy. They are mind-bogglingly complicated. Means it is a wonder that the internet at all works. I mean, finally, when you finish your study of the network layer, you yourself will be surprised that at all this thing is working with reasonable amount of satisfaction to the users. Yeah, we complain that my connection is slow, I am having random disconnections, but still 99% of the time we are happy, which is just unbelievable that this at all works with that much level of satisfaction. Okay. It is so complicated. And like the magical thing which I still find the most magical in this entire subject is that you have an inherently unreliable layer at the bottom, the network layer, but the transport layer is reliable. So you are basing yourself on a layer which is completely unreliable, but you are guaranteed that I am reliable. That's a very difficult guarantee to make, because then you need to take the burden of ensuring everything. All the mistakes that the transport layer is making, you need to take care of correcting those mistakes. And that's what it does. So the transport layer is kind of the heart, both transport and network, both, but we'll start with the transport layer. These two are the heart of the computer networks. Okay, these two are the most complicated, the most widely researched. These two topics are the most difficult, and still so much research goes on trying to understand exactly how they behave. Even they are so complicated that still people do not fully understand. Well, I have made some protocols, they are working widely implemented all over the world, billions of devices using these protocols, but how exactly do they perform in practice? Is this the limit of performance? Is it possible to improve the performance further? What can be done? Can the security be improved further? All these are active research topics still going on. Okay, so we'll now start our study of the transport layer. It is about 9:25. I'll take a 5-minute break. We'll start at 9:30. I have already uploaded this slide on the Moodle, and I will send a separate email through ERP, but just wanted to inform you that your first class test will be on the last Saturday of January, based on whatever has been taught till this application layer, from the beginning till the end of just now that I'm finishing this application layer till this point. So last Saturday of January is 30th January. Okay. So on 30th January, you will have your class test. What is a convenient time for you, students? It will be an online test. More details will be given, but it will be an online test. You have to submit on Moodle. Can you hear me, students?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
What is the convenient date? Anybody has any issues? I prefer it to be from around 3:30 to 5 or 4 to 5, something like that in the afternoon. I mean, it does not require my intervention. Okay, it's automatically configured on Moodle, so it does not require my intervention, but I prefer that time. If you have any other preference, you can tell me. it will probably be 1 hour. Maximum 1 hour 15 minutes, but not more than that. Probably we'll keep it just 1 hour. So if nobody has any objection, I will schedule the test from 4 to 5 p.m. on 30th January. Okay. I will send email through ERP so that all of you get email about it. I will also post the announcement on Moodle. That will be your first class test. Weightage probably 20%, but we don't know. We'll decide at the end of the course. And don't get confused about the face value of the marks shown. If the weightage is 20%, if the face value of the marks in the question paper is 30, it will be scaled to 20 at the end of the semester. So don't worry about that. Okay. Okay, so I'll come back in 5 minutes. You can also refresh maybe for 5 minutes, and we'll come back in 5 minutes and start with a new topic. Okay, students, welcome back. And let us start our study of the transport layer. By the way, in the diagram that ended the last set of slides is also appears on this title slide. One particular term is mentioned here called PDU. PDU means Protocol Data Unit. Why is a generic name Protocol Data Unit? Because the data unit in the different layers have different names depending on the protocol. Okay, so HTTP creates its own packet that becomes a transport layer data unit called a segment that becomes an IP protocol data unit in the network layer. It is called a datagram that becomes a Ethernet frame possibly in the data link layer, etc., etc. Okay, so again, if you have forgotten, it is packet, segment, datagram, and frame. Okay, so today, now we are going to start the study of transport layers and how transport layer segments are transmitted in an error-free way through a logical connection end-to-end transport layer segment connection that is set up between the two transport layer entities. One entity or process, transport layer process at the one process at the on the one side and another process at the other side, which exchanges these segments as the relevant information. The transport layer is primarily implemented in software. I mean, entirely implemented in software probably. And usually it is part of the network modern operating system kernels. The common API function calls are provided to the application developers who can call these functions. In Unix type operating systems, these function calls are C function calls. These APIs are basically C function calls, where proper parameters have to be given, their formats have to be there as format, etc. Fine. There is a concept of encapsulation of PDUs as data flows through the different layers. You also probably need to know of this. This is an important concept. There is an HTTP data over which you append an HTTP header. This concept of separation of header and data is there for all the PDUs. Okay. So first, HTTP packets will have a separate HTTP header and data. The header contains important information about the connection and the particular PDU. Similarly, there is a TCP header, which we will come to know of during our course of study of this topic. There is an IP header, which we will come to know of, and there will be a MAC header for the data link layer frames, which also we will come to know of. Not all aspects of these headers or all parameters of these headers are equally important. Not all there are certain option fields also sometimes which need not be always filled up. Okay, there can be blank option fields and still it will work. So all these things are there. Now it depends on the particular protocol. Finally, the physical layer has both a header and a trailer and makes a long PDU which is transported. So we will primarily concentrate on the TCP layer segments, that is at the transport layer. Another important thing which is not clear here is that, which is not clear explicitly, but which should be give you some hint from the length of this PDUs shown. See, the transport layer data is exactly the length of the application layer packet. Okay, so this entire application layer packet actually becomes the transport layer layer data over which a header is added. Then that entire thing becomes the network layer header data over which an IP header is added. Okay, then the entire network layer datagram that becomes data for the data link layer data over which the MAC header is added, etc. This concept is called encapsulation of data. So there is previous something existing form that is encapsulated by adding additional headers as you go on and on. Okay, so this thing happens. This encapsulation happens. So as repeatedly mentioned, that transport layer services are primarily of two types. One is UDP, which performs end-to-end packet delivery, but nothing more. Essentially, it is an unreliable service. But the more commonly studied, commonly used transport layer mechanism is the TCP protocol, which we will study in detail, which performs connection establishment and also release, which is not listed here. Connection establishment and release, reliable data delivery, flow and congestion control, and ordered packet delivery. Each of these concepts, connection establishment and release, reliable data delivery, flow and congestion control, ordered packet delivery, each of these concepts will take 1 or more weeks for us to cover. So the transport layer coverage itself might take a month or so or more. Okay, it is that complicated. Then comes the network layer. We will not go into details of its working now because that will be, we will discuss it in detail when the time comes. But essentially it performs unreliable datagram delivery. By unreliable, it is meant that it tries its best to deliver the datagram, but there is no guarantee that it will be able to deliver the datagram. Okay. On the way, the datagrams might get lost, might not reach the end, might get killed by the routers if certain conditions are violated. Okay, many things can happen. It is not that they are just lost by accident because of where connecting two routers are actually broken. That might happen. That's a physical failure. But suddenly the router loses power or suddenly a router crashes. Yes, those are physical failures. But there are also protocol level failures. The IP protocol has certain peculiarities which makes it quite difficult to guarantee that the datagram which originated from point A will reach its destination point B. There is no guarantee. It tries its best by the choices it makes, but there is no guarantee. Okay. So again, a simplified version of the diagram we studied. There is an application layer. There is an interface between the application and transport layers. This interface is important for application programmers to understand who want to develop applications. Actually, this interface is important because it gives them the information and the standard ways to interface with the transport layers through particular API calls like this. So the transport entity, the kind of a process, well, I shouldn't call it process because the The process, it might look to you that the process is basically your program that you have written at the application level. But there is a kind of a conceptual thing called a transport entity, which is not really visible to you. It is sitting somewhere probably in the operating system kernel and managing this connection of segments between another transport entity on the other side. Now, there are addresses that this transport entity identifies, which is its identifier for the application. And these addresses are something called ports, which we have kind of seen earlier. Some server processes or the server applications are there which uses fixed ports, like we have discussed so many. FTP uses 20, 21, HTTP uses 80, etc., etc. Now, the problematic part, the confusing part is this part of the diagram, which says the segment is directly transferred from the transport entity and between the two transport entities. Again, don't get confused by this. The actual physical diagram of what actually happens is this one. There is no direct transfer of physical transfer of segments between them. Segments cannot be directly transferred between two remote computers. They must be translated or encapsulated into datagrams, which must be encapsulated into frames, and then to physical layer stuff like here, shown here, and then transmitted to the remote machine, and then go all the way up. So just like when it goes down, it keeps on increasing in size with added on headers. When it goes up, it gets stripped of all its headers. Okay. It gets stripped of the physical layer, header and trailer, then the link layer, header and trailer, then network header and trailer, then header, then transport layer header, and finally the application, which has got nothing to do with the transport layer header, gets the way the data in the form it wants. Okay. So this is very important to understand that although logically there seems to be a segment transfer between the transport entities, this is not correct. Actually, physically, it happens through network layer and lower layers. Now, this network layer and the transport entity also needs to interface with the network layer in some way. Okay. How to do that? It does it through a network address, okay, which is basically an kind of the IP address, you can say. Okay. It's through that it manages to do this thing. Now, the transport entities, interestingly, continuously monitor what information is getting through, what information is getting transmitted between this through this pipe, whether there is any missing information. If there is any information missing or anything that it was expecting but it did not receive, it knocks the other transport entity and requests, please send it. It also acknowledges every successful piece, every segment that has been successfully received. Okay. Now, what transport primitives? So primitives are basically, so we will start with some hypothetical transport service primitives. Okay. Means these are kind of fundamental functions which are provided to the application layer. Okay. To allow the users to access the transport service, the transport layer must provide some operations to the application programs, as I mentioned. So the primitives can be listen. Okay, no packet is sent. Listen is a primitive where the transport layer entity keeps on, or the process, I mean, transport layer entity as requested by the application layer process keeps on listening at a particular port. Okay. It block until some process tries to connect. Means block means basically just don't do anything else, just keep on listening to the same port. Then there is a connect primitive, which is saying that I am actively requesting connection. Okay, this can be to the some other computer. Okay, then it is sent after the connection has been requested and set up successfully. How the connection is set up successfully is also some details are missing here, but as we go on, we will find these details. Yes, the connect request, and then there is this send data. And now after connection has been sent up, you request do it using some send primitive. Then there is a receive primitive, which is just receive the data until the packet arrives, and then there's a disconnect. There's a disconnection request which says that I'm done. I'm requesting a release of the connection, and the other party should comply, and then finally it will be released. So because it is blocking it, it is waiting for some event to happen in the listen and receive primitives. It needs to remember the state of the pipe, the logical pipe that has been set up between the two entities. Okay. So that no information unexpectedly is lost, or no information is kind of is received unexpectedly also. So these things keep on happening. Notice now that corresponding to even the connection and disconnection, now there are two arrows. Okay, as I think I mentioned in a previous class, now in this computer networks course, please get used to timing diagrams where the time axis is downward pointing vertical. Okay, downward pointing vertically. This is unlike other domains, say in circuits or when you are plotting waveforms, etc. You usually consider the time axis to be the horizontal axis. However, that's not the case here. Get used to this. Okay. So suppose the client requests a connection from a server using the connect primitive, and there is a connection request. The server was keeping on listening at a particular port, fixed port possibly, like say 80 for HTTP protocol. And when it receives the connection request, within a short span of time, it accepts the connection request by send back an acknowledgement message saying that yes, I accept the connection request and it's okay. You can now send me data. Notice the difference of the spacing between the where this red arrow ends and where this red arrow begins. There is a finite non-zero spacing on the server side. Okay. This part. This is basically to show that some time has passed before the server sends back the connection request, because the server also needs to do some computation at its end to do some sanity checking, to decide on some resources, to assign these resources, etc., etc. Okay, then it sends a connection acknowledge request and it establishes a connection. And then using the send primitive, data can be sent and it is received. What is not shown here is that for every segment that of data that is sent to the server and this receive thing executes, immediately the data would be, that segment would be acknowledged by a message sent back. That is not shown here. Okay, but that has to be, you will see that's the case. That's what happens. Okay. Corresponding to every data segment that will be sent. Here only one arrow, red arrow is shown, but many data segments will be sent in practice. Each of these data segments will be acknowledged, or it is possible that a bunch of data segments are acknowledged using one single acknowledgement message. That is also possible, but they will be acknowledged. Finally, when the data transfer from the client to the server is done, there will be a disconnect request and to disconnect the request, and then the server side would acknowledge that this connection can be disconnected safely. Okay, so it needs to remember the state once the connection has been established. Okay, that this is a existing connection between the client and the server. This much of data, this many segments have passed. This is the next expected segment number. Segments are remembered in terms of segment numbers. What is the next expected segment number? Also, there is no, of course, there is no concept of what is the next expected segment content. The data of the segment, nobody knows what will come next. But the content, but the number of the segment, it tries to remember that if segments are numbered serially, starting from say 1, 2, 3, 4 like that, then till now I have received segment number 11. The next segment I am expecting is segment number 12. This type of information it remembers. Fine. So this, the left half of the diagram, these are like the state diagrams of this thing. The left part is with dotted lines is corresponds to the server, and the right parts with the solid lines correspond to the client. Okay. So just take your time to go through this a little bit. We initially have an idle stage. The server, the client initiates a connect request, and then the server receives the connection request, and then the connect primitive is executed and the connection is established. The time when the server takes to execute the connect primitive and establish the connection, the server is said to be in a passive establishment pending state. Because why? Because it is in a passive state because somebody was trying to connect to it. Okay. So the party which tried to actively connect to somebody else is called the active party. So in this case, the client is the active party. So and correspondingly, the client also is an active connection establishment pending phase. Okay, because its connection is pending, but it is the active party. Then when the connection comes to an established state, then data transfer might happen. That is not shown, but finally, when the client requests a disconnection, the server goes in a passive disconnect pending state. It waits for the disconnection to happen. The disconnection itself is not quite complicated, but it has certain peculiarities. And during that time, the client is said to be in the active disconnect pending state because it is the active party. Otherwise, this timing, these state diagrams are kind of symmetrical. So again, segment datagram, the relationship between segment, datagram and frame is this. Segment is the transport layer data, transport layer stuff where there is a payload, that is the data, followed by a transport layer header, segment header. That entire thing is encapsulated inside a datagram or an IP packet where an additional IP header is added, and finally the entire thing is encapsulated inside an data link layer frame where an additional frame layer is added. So let us stop today at this point. On Monday, we will continue with the connection establishment and complications of that thing. Okay, next week. Thank you. Class test will be on 30th January, as I said, and I will send an email notifying this and also put up a notice on Moodle. I'm stopping the recording now.